We continue now here on the Newsfeed Late Night with your reporting. In 1994, the IEC was responsible for organizing and managing the first South African democratic elections for over 19 million people. The Electoral Commissions Act of 1996 established the IEC as a permanent body responsible for strengthening constitutional democracy and promoting democratic electoral processes. However, 2020, the Constitutional Court declared the Electoral Act unconstitutional because it didn't allow for independent candidates to be elected. To help me reflect on South Africa's electoral system 27 years into democracy, I'm joined by the former IEC Commissioner and Executive Chair at the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, Terry Tsilanta. Terry, good evening and thank you very much for your time tonight here on the Newsfeed Late Night. Certainly, voter turnout has dropped significantly between 1994 at 86% to, I think in 2014 it was sitting at 57%. Is that a mere function of democracy normalizing, or is there something to this, voters choosing to abstain as a sign of showing their political dissatisfaction?
Well, I think it is difficult to compare the 1994 elections and the recent elections that the country has had, largely because in 1994 there was no voters' roll, and therefore we could not say that the number of people who really qualified to participate in the elections during that period was this number, because nobody really knew, and then remember that people were using multiplicity of ID numbers. There were TBVC states, and so some people were using the IDs that they had acquired from the homelands, and others were using those that they had actually acquired from the central government of South Africa. So we cannot compare those numbers in that respect. Now, when you look at the numbers have really increased in real terms. I mean, we now have about 26 million people registered on the voters' roll, and therefore we can say that even if though the voter turnout might appear to be lower in percentage terms, but when you really look at the number of people who are participating in the elections, you can see that there has really been a significant growth.
What role then does that abstention play in our electoral system, but also in our democracy? Does it in any way erode the integrity of our democratic institutions? Does it in any way weaken the quality of our democracy?
Of course. I mean, if you've got lower voter turnout, it will have a significant impact in terms of the credibility and integrity of the electoral process. Therefore, it is the responsibility not only of the Electoral Commission, but of all other stakeholders, particularly the political parties, to mobilize and incite people to be part of the electoral process. Electoral process is a joint responsibility between the Electoral Commission or an election management body, as well as those stakeholders that are interested in playing a role in democratic processes. The civil society has got a responsibility of mobilizing and educating people to be part of this process. And therefore, all the stakeholders have got to play an important role in terms of mobilizing people to go to the voting stations.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at, for example, protest hotspots and the link to turnout during local government elections, there seems to be no relationship at all. The political parties saying, well, this is due to a number of things, main being voter education. Would you agree? People would probably show up more for a national election than they would show up for a local government election.
Yes, and then the reason why people would actually go and attend to national elections more than local government election, it is largely because of the profile of the political parties. You realize that most of the people play much more, place much more currency on the importance of national and political, national and provincial elections than they do with local government elections. So as a result of that, there is always a higher voter turnout when it comes to national and provincial elections than when it comes to local government elections.
Now, you said previously that elections are such a sensitive issue that one mistake can cause a revolution, and it's one of the factors that you actually emphasize. We saw a phenomenon of double voting in the last national elections. How seriously is that particular matter taken, and how quickly should it actually be addressed?
Well, problems of that nature should not really happen in electoral processes. I think those who manage the elections understand the importance of having to make sure that the integrity of the process is protected, and therefore any situation that can lead to people voting more than once has got the potential of really creating a havoc in the country. And I would believe that the Commission would have put in place mechanisms and measures to make sure that those kind of incidents do not recur going forward, especially with the upcoming local government elections.
So are you saying we have a real issue of holding people accountable?
Well, the Commission is well aware of the fact that if anything goes wrong in the elections, then they will really have serious issues in their hands. And therefore, we have to call upon the Commission to make sure that they rectify mistakes similar to the ones that they had in the previous elections, so that you don't have any controversies of that nature. But I would like to believe that largely because they had to conduct a study through the Statistician General, that is an indication that they also take the credibility of the elections seriously, and therefore they would not want to see a recurrence of those kind of incidents in the upcoming local government elections.
27 years on into our freedom, there's still a sense that people don't necessarily feel free that they can, for example, recall an MP. Right? They don't really have that freedom because of how our system works, because those MPs are then on to Parliament through their party ticket, and an individual does not feel empowered to be able to say, oh, well, I put you there, I want you out because you're not delivering. How do we remedy that?
Well, you may be aware that following the Constitutional Court judgment on the Electoral Act, particularly Section 57A of the Electoral Act, that there are attempts to rectify the defects that are there in the electoral system. And one of the issues that has got to be attended to immediately, it's obviously to make sure that the independents are able to contest the elections at national and provincial level. So the creation of constituencies, is actually going to be quite critical in ensuring that people who get elected at national and provincial level do represent particular constituencies that they would be coming from.
And is that going to have a significant impact, right? There are some who are saying, look, in South Africa, we are still very much a one-party system so far, with the EFF contending that, well, they have eaten much of the ANC vote, and they are making progress and making headway. Are South Africans ready for that constituency-based type of model?
Well, I must indicate that the issue of one dominant party in a proportional representation system, it's actually an anomaly, because the system of proportional representation is meant to ensure that political parties that get a smaller percentage of vote still get a representation. So what we have in South Africa, or what we have had in South Africa for all these years, is not normally what happens in a proportional representation system. So increasingly, when you look at the results of the elections, you begin to see that there is a narrowing of gap between the political parties, whereas in the past you'd find that the current governing party would have a significant percentage of votes. That is decreasing, and then you're beginning to see new players such as political parties that are supposedly smaller beginning to have representation in parliament. And this is a significant development in the evolution of our democratic project.
Yeah. With the constituency system in place, are you anticipating that we are going to see even more of that gap closing?
Absolutely. I mean, look, in the short term, it might be a little bit difficult for the independents, but in the long run, it is something that is actually going to be significant for the country. And we are going to begin to see more and more independents beginning to make inroads in parliament, and depending on how many constituencies that are going to be created, there is a possibility that you are likely to have more independents, and those independents being able to club together to sway the direction of the political system in the country.
Teresilan, I appreciate your time and thank you very much for joining us tonight. Former IEC Commissioner and Executive Chair of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, Teresilan.